a great honor to call the 8th Congress of the Americas in session after the vicissitudes and difficulties of the last years. Please, for the translators, be sure you are using your equipment, and if you speak, that you speak distinctly and loudly so everyone may hear you. In the past 3 years, 23 of our number have passed on, and so I would now ask you to be upstanding for one moment of silence. In memoriam, may their memory be a blessing. Please be seated. It is now a tremendous honor to have on the podium the leaders of the craft, and I call upon the Grand Master of the Grand Orient, who has honored us today to speak to us, and we are very, very appreciative of that. Grand Master.
Thank you, dear Paul. Dear friends, the Grand Orient de France is, of course, honored to welcome you for this international conference on Freemasonry. This is the 4th time that is taking place in Paris under the auspices of the American organization, Policy Studies Organization, and the Museum of Freemasonry, with this year the participation of the Grand Chapitre Général of the Grand Orient de France. I'd like to thank, first of all those who allowed this meeting from happening, thanks to their research and the knowledge that we're going to share during the next couple of days. Of course, in the first rows, Mr. Paul Rich, the president of Policy Studies Organization, which has been organizing this event since 2015, and I'd like to thank more particularly Philippe Guglielmi, the très sage and grand vénérable du Grand Chapitre Général of the Grand Orient de France, who has been supporting us continuously, and we'd like to also honor Margaret Jacobs, who was supposed to be with us during these next 2 days, but who had to go back to the United States due to a personal emergency. And I'd like also to congratulate Cécile Révauger from the Grand Chapitre Général, as well as Pierre Mollier, who is the curator, and Thierry Cousin, who's somewhere and in charge of the Museum of Freemasonry. They have worked hard in the past couple of months to prepare the best possible way this significant event, and I'm sure it will be a great success. We have the great pleasure of welcoming you here today, Rue Cadet, at the historical headquarters of the Grand Orient de France in our temple, Arthur Grossier's temple, named after a Grand Master before the Second World War that marked the French political history with the labor code, but also the history of the Grand Orient de France. Since it was created in Edinburgh in 2007, this event has known an international success dedicated to the academic study of Freemasonry. You will be able to listen to historical Freemasons coming from different countries and the main research centers on Freemasonry. And this year's theme is the French Rite and the Culture of the Enlightenment. We are particularly honored to have with us today Andrew Prescott, who has renewed the studies of the origins of Freemasonry. John Belton, one of the moderator of the very famous research lodge of the Quatuor Coronatic in London. Arturo de Hoyos, who is the main archive manager of the direction in Washington, or a representative of the Serignac on the works of Spanish and Latino American masonry, and many other figures coming from different horizons. It shows you the importance of this event, but also its ambition. These meetings are for us and a unique opportunity to listen to four figures in masonry research. From our friends coming from foreign countries, it's also the opportunity to discover and to better know the French and historical tradition. This fourth Parisian edition of our conference is more particularly dedicated this year to the connections between the French Rite, Freemasonry, and the Enlightenment. It will be our main theme for our works in the next couple of days, and we are looking forward to listening to your discoveries, your insights on this particular topic that's dear to our heart, as you know, at the Grand Orient de France. We will talk about the affiliation of the Enlightenment, the Freemasonry, and influence on Freemasonry, placing Freemasonry in a historical perspective so that we can better understand the philosophical, cultural, and social scope of and on the whole world and on the country and our republic in particular. We will also be able to attend a little roundtable that will talk about Freemasonry since the 18th century on skin color and slavery. And before I conclude this introductory speech as the Grand Master of Freemasonry here, I would like to digress slightly. Indeed, you are here today because, of course, you are fascinated by historical Freemasonry, but I think that some of you are Freemasons, and if that's the case, you belong to obediences that are sharing a long past, but that have visions of Freemasonry that are diverse and maybe sometimes different. Each, and that's legitimate, is convinced that they are practicing real Freemasonry. Let's hope that these 2 days of exchanges and debates are also going to be a great opportunity to discover other Masonic paths and to, as we said, assemble what is scattered, one of the main functions of Freemasonry. An event as today is an illustration of Saint-Exupéry's motto that the Grand Orient de France has decided to write in the entry hall to define the Masonic approach. This is this type of enrichment that I wish you for the next couple of days. Thank you very much and enjoy your conference.
We have another grand today. We partook of his hospitality yesterday, and we are honored to have with us the head of the Scottish Rite here in France, and I think a good friend of the conference. Sir, the podium is yours.
Thank you. Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear brothers and sisters, thank you to our Grand Master, Georges Serignac, for having inaugurated this conference, the theme being the French Rite and the culture of the Enlightenment. I might repeat what the Grand Master has said, but my references are justified. I would like to thank the organizers who, thanks to their work, allowed us to be together today in this historical temple, Rue Cadet, an inauguration of our second day that will take place at the National Library of France, the BNF. I'd like to thank the Freemasonry Museum and its director, Pierre Mollier, who's been thanked twice today. I think he deserves it. And you all know him, as well as Thierry Cuisin and his team, who have supported him. The Grand Orient de France has placed these facilities, made them available for us. I'd like to thank the members of the Grand Orient de France with Cécile Révauger, who's a well-known historian, and Jean-Francis Auriac, and his assistants, Mokrad Mendel, Patrick Devos, as well as Gaël, who have dedicated their time to the organization of this event, and they didn't have a choice, actually. This conference is unprecedented in the history of Grand Orient de France, thanks to the quality of the numerous and talented speakers. I'd like to thank them all for their participation. First of all, I'd like to thank Paul Rich, who is at the initiative of these 2 days. He's been relentless and very benevolent in organizing this date. He's graduating from Harvard, and he received the congratulations of the jury at the University of Australia. He is the member of St. John Lodge of Boston, the most ancient lodge in the U.S. He's a member of the North and South jurisdiction of the Supreme Council of the Écossais Rite in the U.S. Paul Rich is an honorary fellow member of the Royal Historical Organization, the Asian Historical Organization in Hong Kong, and the Royal Society in Dublin. He's in charge of research at the University of Stanford. He was professor of university at the University of Americas in Mexico and at the George Mason University in Virginia. His books are on Freemasonry quite often, and also on foreign interventions in the Persian Gulf. A study on the presence of British people in the Gulf, 2 books on the political dimension of the educational system, British educational system, and many studies on fraternalism. Full stop, otherwise we can continue for ages. So he's presiding Policy Studies Organization at the moment, a sponsor of this conference, and the West Valley Press, an NGO. I would like to, in a few seconds, give the medal to Paul Rich and his 2 colleagues, Daniel Coulterius and Guillermo de los Reyes. I'd like to thank as well, warmly thank other speakers who are going to take part in many sessions in our conference. And I'd like to give their names, 35 of them. Pierre-Yves Beaurepaire, professor in history at the University of Nice. I think we should thank them personally and name them. Stéphanie Rosa, in charge of research at the CNRS. Cécile Révauger, that we've mentioned already, emeritus professor in English studies. Margaret Jacobs, the Grand Master, conveyed her apologies for medical reasons, who is a professor at the University of Los Angeles. Pierre Mollier, head of the Library, Archives and Museum of the Grand Orient de France, historian of Freemasonry. Pierre, I've named you 3 times now, it's over. Philippe Foussier, former Grand Master of the Grand Orient de France. Jean-Christophe Garrigue, university academician, president of the Commission History of the Grand Chapitre Général. Luis Pla Alos, member of the Grand Chapitre Général of Spain. Laura Kai, former Grand Venerable of the Grand Chapitre Féminin of France. Louis Lopez, Grand Secretary of the Chapitre du Grand Orient Général. Joaquim Grave dos Santos, researcher, member of the Grand Chapitre Général of Portugal. Joe Wages, independent researcher. Christophe de Villers, editor of the Grand Orient de France Review, Humanism. Paul Leblanc, Grand Chancellor of the Fifth Order, Grand Chapitre Général of the Grand Orient de France. Didier Moline, member of the Administration Chamber of the Grand Chapitre Général. Géraud Contremoulin, historian of Freemasonry. Philippe Foussier, I've named him already, twice then. He's a friend. Charles Coutel, professor, emeritus professor in law philosophy at the University of Artois. Jean Mondeau, emeritus professor in German studies at the University of Bordeaux. Eric Saunier, lecturer in history at the University of the Havre and director of Leuven. which is the Masonic Studies Institute. Philippe Corte-Real de Camargo, such a teacher at the University of Bristol, lecturer. Roger Daché, director of the Masonic Institute of France. We all know him and the institute as well. Colette Léger, historian of the French right more particularly, and she's got many other competences. Elena Tronca, très sage and parfait Grand Général of the female chapter in France. Michel Paris and Marcel Rose, très sage and parfait Grand Général of the Grand Chapitre Général of Belgium. And that's it for thanking everyone. And as I was saying at the beginning of my introduction, this is a significant moment of the life of the Grand Chapitre Général on French right. It's a great moment for our Grand Obedience, the Grand Orient de France. This is highlighting the development of our jurisdiction, that's for sure, but also the fact that we are taking ownership again of its great historical heritage. Our theme, French right and the culture of the Enlightenment, is showing the meaning of the French right that was born with the Enlightenment, and thanks to its history allowed reformist and progressist ideas of the 18th century to be put forward and shared up to now. Thanks to the historical reality at the Conference of Prospective Perception in the 20th century that today's speakers are going to share the presentation. Today's goal is not for Freemasons to talk to other Freemasons, but rather to the world of men and women that are surrounding us, because according to Charles de Montesquieu, that I like to quote, when you want to do great things, you don't put yourself above men, but rather in the midst. And that's what we're doing today. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thanks to your presence, thank you very much. We are going to give the medals of the Grand Chapitre Général to Paul Rich and his assistants.
On va la remettre à Paul Rich.
So the Grand Master is going to give it to Paul Rich.
Indeed. Well, I'm going to go home now. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow.
Very good.
Alors, où sont les assistants?
And the assistants, Guillermo? Dan, where is Dan?
C'est Dan? Ben voilà, Dan.
Oh,
That's a very
C'est pour
great
toi.
honor.
merci beaucoup.
For you.
Thank you very much.
Hein? Voilà. Bon, allez.
Guillermo arrive, il arrive.
Il arrive, Guillermo. Ben voilà, allez. Je lui remets.
Voilà, tenez. Et la médaille?
La médaille, quand même.
La médaille,
Ce serait utile.
même s'il est en retard. Voilà.
Bon, merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Hein? Allez, félicitations.
Merci, merci.
That was certainly a surprise, and we're going to have to come more often. If you have your mic. I regret that my French would shock you. I am the victim of French lessons in an English boarding school, so you can imagine what it sounds like. I would like to tell you that there will be refreshments starting at the first interval, and if the talks today are not digestible, the food will be, I assure you. So, it's our custom to present a rare Masonic book to the library here because of all the appreciation we have for Pierre Molière and this great, great library of the Grand Orient. And of course, the Grand Lodge has its own good library too. The special, very rare book this year to present on our behalf to the library is a particularly attractive and most desirable book, The Secrets of the Freemasons, which some of you who collect will recognize the enormous value of it. Grandmaster, for your library.
Merci,
And
merci vraiment.
you can take it home and read it.
Très heureux. Bah, je vais comme ça.
Thank you very much. I will take it home and I will give it a read. Put it on my bedside table. Thank you very much.
We'll go to the first slide. We are located in a historic area of Washington with many Masonic associations. And the building is an allegory on the craft. It appears to have been built in one piece long ago, but actually it was two houses. And when you come inside our door, you realize that it is indeed two homes from Washington's 19th century. And so it is with Freemasonry, represented today by many diverse interests. We have 11 countries this year, 49 papers, and I so much appreciate seeing some of you again, that we got through somehow the testing time we have had. We publish 36 learned journals, 160 books a year, and we have endeavored to become the largest publisher of Masonic books in the world. And we have editorial offices here in Paris, and we have a journal associated with the Grand Orient and Pierre Molière, the Journal of Ritual, and we very much appreciate it. I was asked to look back over the last 8 conferences. It is like the story of the Reverend or Parson's egg in England. He was asked about his breakfast egg, and he said, well, it was good in parts. And in Masonry, we have so many different varieties, some good, some not so enthusiastically acclaimed. But we all agree that fraternalism is an interesting topic. Now, looking back, and I see some people here who were in Edinburgh nearly 20 years ago. Looking back, we have had some extremely interesting innovations in scholarship. I personally have taken a great interest in the companionage, and we have today again our historian of the companionage, who is probably the leading historian of it in France. And we have with us Cecilia, a constant advocate of women's masonry and its history. We have Guillermo de los Reyes, who marshals for us Latin America. And we have, speaking about something which I'm glad to say annoys the Grand Lodge of England, we have Andrew Prescott and Susan Summers, who have shown that what the Grand Lodge of England thinks is its anniversary is not its anniversary. And they have a great paper for us today. I cannot give enough credit to all the different strains of scholarship that we have seen here. If we could have 2. And in looking at it, I thought that some of us were foxes and some of us were hedgehogs. You have to decide, Professor Berlin's famous analogy, and I hope we're all both. But I thought I should come dressed as a hedgehog or a fox, and I tried to find cufflinks that would have both a hedgehog and a fox on them to be neutral. But I was deceived, number 3. And in our journal, you will find far more foxes than you will find hedgehogs. I think all of you are more foxes than you are hedgehogs. I see a lot of foxes here. So I concluded that maybe we needed more hedgehogs. In our library of Freemasonry, which Joe is the head of, if we could see the library, it's 4, and scroll. The library publishes both in French and English, mostly in English, and we select books which, as you know, are too expensive, too dear, and we try to pick books which scholars need but can't afford. I don't think the antiquarian book dealers particularly appreciate that, but we have been very gratified by their academic use and the fact that we make available to people around the world books that they could not have purchased on their own. And we are always, of course, interested in publishing original works of French and other scholars. So I wanted to come today dressed appropriately, but I could not get cufflinks that had both a hedgehog and a fox being happy. So if we go to 5. So instead, I split them, and I'm wearing one hedgehog and one fox. And maybe that is the solution to scholarship, that we want to be cosmic, but it's not always possible. There is a book I recommend. It's called Future Babel. It's about scholarship. Its subtitle is Why Pundits Are Hedgehogs and Foxes Know Best. They go on to say that the hedgehogs find complexity and uncertainty unacceptable. Well, I am not a monomaniac, and I don't think many of you are. But I would like to say, based on the last 8 Congresses, that maybe we need to be a little bit more hedgehog than we have been. If we could see the Princeton. When I visit the Princeton University campus, go back to, they have a sculpture dedicated to hedgehogs and foxes. It's in the center of the campus, so I guess they think it's important. And you can ride your bike through Hedgehogville or Foxville. There goes somebody who's chosen to be a hedgehog. And there it sits. Now, I don't think the Louvre is going to ask for it. But it does symbolize this approach. A Greek poet first asserted that a fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one big thing. And as you know, Berlin famously divided all thinkers into hedgehogs and foxes. He thought the hedgehogs were Dante and Hegel and Proust, and the foxes were Erasmus and Shakespeare and Molière. I don't know. I don't want to start a quarrel. This approach is a two-way street. We have here, if I dare to say it, the most distinguished Masonic scholars in the world. Most of them are foxes. But you know, if we would enlarge our vision, too many times War and Peace is presented without any mention of the strong Masonic element in it that Tolstoy used, and the prince's dissatisfaction with us as a school of charity. And too often I sit through Mozart, and there is never an explanation of Mozart's intense interest in the craft. Missing then in the last 8 Congresses has been a colleague of mine who I have not entirely agreed with, Professor Robert Putnam. We share Harvard together, but we do not share together an appreciation of bowling alone. If we might look at the next 7. Professor Putnam, as you all know, called attention to the social community in bowling alone, and now he has a new book, The Upswing. And from the very time he published it, I entered into controversy with him over this. Brent Morris, who is not with us today because of illness, also monitored the decline in the United States of Masonry, and it started in around 1920 and began its decline. So we have not suffered anywhere a decline in social community the way he describes it. He showed in his book we have published, A Radical in the East, that in 1920, the Oddfellows, who remained strong in Scandinavia, had 1,760,000 members in the United States. By 1930, they were reduced to 1,300,000. The Knights of Pythias, which I'm a member, had 811,000 members in 1920, 533,000 by 1930, and I may be the last Pythian you will ever see. So, the Masons did increase after World War II for very specific reasons, and there were 4,500,000 Masons in America. They now are reduced to perhaps 900,000. But Dr. Morris tells us this: certain fundamental changes occurred in the membership of the American craft. At the same time that the doors were open to the working class, the status speakers, to use Dr. Morris's own words, joined the country clubs, and they took up golf. And we did not lose them. We moved to a new class of initiates, and Dr. Morris says, yesterday's Masons are now in a country club. It's not true here, but true in the U.S. Professor Putnam, in his debates with me and elsewhere, has always presented this as a current worldwide crisis. I challenge you as scholars to think about this and join me in proving that this is an overgeneralization about phenomena. These remarks about the collapse of community have been very lightly investigated by Masonic scholars who should have participated in that wide debate. We cannot confine our scholarship to just us. We need to reach out to the universities, and I constantly press on this, and I find a great deal of interest in universities and scholarly societies in what we do, and we don't speak up enough. It fell to a non-Mason, but a Harvard colleague, Professor Jason Kaufman, to express this in a biting book for the common good. And he speaks about American civic life, and particularly the Masons. And he said, why do you think they do any good? Why do you regret their disappearance? And he said, Americans did not stop caring about their communities. When we became a nation of equals, the less we needed to be a nation of joiners. At the urging of my lamented Stanford colleague, Seymour Martin Lipset, I led the charge against bowling alone in the annals of the American Academy. We could have 9. And this article in the Academy's proceedings has stood, I believe, the sense of time. I think that the Masonic reaction to bowling alone has been, ironically, to just accept it, as if Professor Putnam understood Freemasonry or the machinations within it. He made very little use of the Masonic material or even of Dr. Morris. For example, in America, men, like myself, are members of the Eastern Star, which is a large women's group, but cannot function without men in principal chairs, which is sort of ridiculous, but I mean, they have to have us there. And the shrine, and you know us, we wear these stupid red fezzes and drive little go-karts, but do raise money for hospitals. The shrine, you have to be a Mason. So obviously, if the Eastern Star declines, and if the shrine declines, you do not have to be an Albert Einstein to figure out that they would decline, because they would not have sufficient Masons. So he increased the Masonic decline threefold in his first book by using these ancillary organizations. Now, another example of this problem with bowling alone, which is quoted every hour and every minute as if it was Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I can assure you, is the Grange. Now, the Grange started by Masons as a secret fraternity for people in agriculture or rural areas, if we could have 10. Now, you will notice there are women in the Grange Lodge room, and you will notice the peculiar tools of the Grange. But wouldn't you, as somebody interested in agriculture, immediately say, well, the rural population has declined. The farms are bigger, so there are no people to join the Grange. I'm also a Granger. In fact, I want to confess to you that I join anything. If they were out in the lobby, I would just join and learn the handshake. And but I despair for the Grange on the farm. It just is not a viable cause. So what has happened around the world is new things. One of Professor Putnam's big points is the decline of baseball. Well, that's true to an extent, that little kids going out to the ball field and learning baseball have declined. But, 11, in its place we have football, or soccer as we call it, which for some reason has become absolutely de rigueur the excitement for suburbia. And it has produced a legion of women who are soccer moms. and go out to root for soccer, whereas they never would go out for baseball. So as the soccer moms have grown, the baseball people have declined. And again, Professor Putnam does not pay attention to this. Now, I'm not saying today that community and civic life is all cherries and strawberries and joy. But I am saying that it needs from you and me more of a critical examination of what it is and what it does. Again, a friend of mine, Robert Samuelson, who is editorial writer for the Washington Post, analyzed this, and he found that political clubs, sports clubs, hobby clubs, fraternities, and professional groups had all increased, not decreased. And so the argument has gone on, but I put it to you today. Do you think a way to increase the importance and influence of the French Academy would be to eliminate 40 immortals and have 4 million? I don't think the academicians would appreciate that advice. So numbers are not anything. This year, 2 months ago in Ohio, number 12, we had an initiation, and these are widespread. Now, I don't mean to be critical about initiations. We have a custom in America called all the way in one day. So barely do you become a master mason when you fall into the hands of the Scottish Rite and are exalted. Once you've done 32 degrees there, the day is still young, and you can go on to become a Shriner and get your red fez, and then, if it's a good day, you become a member of the Royal Order of Jesters. You must be very tired by the end of the day, I would think. And if you could remember anything, I would say you should really be canonized, because I cannot conceive of this kind of initiation as having any significance whatsoever. All the way in one day. And of course, they never come back. In fact, they don't understand it. Now, in Professor Putnam's newest book, The Upswing, he says there is hope. Well, I think there's always hope. But his remarks, which have been generally accepted in world scholarship about decline, need a great deal of examination. And you haven't given it. I looked through 8 Congresses, and I just found practically no reference to Putnam. Now, he may be insignificant in France, but he certainly is significant in world scholarship in his challenge to us. So, you look at the papers of this Congress, and you think we have had more foxes than we have had hedgehogs. I'm just saying, when we gather again, I'd like to see a few more hedgehogs to comment about these bigger issues which affect everyone. If you remember back in Edinburgh years ago, I had an unfortunate experience. I was scheduled to talk at the conference, and I discovered that the famous poem, 13, of Robert Burns, that all the Scottish lodges use about the apron, wasn't written by Burns, and had been written by, of all things, an American. That was pretty bad, I can tell you, that I was going to have to get up in front of the Lord Mayor of Edinburgh and tell him that the poem was a fake. It gets worse. the BBC was touring a Burns exhibit with his apron. Well, I have to tell you, the apron was a fake. And I thought, I'm going to be run out of town. I will have to go to Fiji because nobody will want to hear me again. The 15. And worse, the Times of London picked the story up and decided to have fun with it. So I was reading in the Sunday Times about all of this. But I was saved. There is a wonderful man, he's now 99, the Lord Elgin. He was the Master Mason of Scotland. We do not call them in Scotland Grand Master, we call them the Master Mason, the Grand Mason. And he was as head of the clan Bruce and all these other things. And he got hold of me and he said, I agree with you. And I have the apron that belonged to Robert Burns. And I'll bring it. And if you were there, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, well, when I give this paper, that's the end of my career. When in comes Lord Elgin with his piper, and he pipes in the apron. Well, you can disagree with me, absolutely. But you cannot disagree with the Lord Elgin. He is, among other things, the Thistle, 16. This is the Order of the Thistle. Yesterday, at the grand, wonderful time we had with the Supreme Council, I mentioned these old orders in their records may have some things we ought to look at. There are some defunct orders, there are some still functioning. And here is Her Majesty and Prince Philip and the Princess Royal all dressed up to greet Lord Elgin, the senior Thistle. 99, there must be something in Scottish food that keeps you going. So we can have adventures in scholarship, and we can agree or disagree civilly. But we need, I think, in coming Congresses to be a little more of the hedgehog and a little less of the fox, if that's possible. Or we can both be hedgehogs and foxes together. I want to thank you again for the wonderful hospitality you always offer, for the courtesies and kindness, your wit and your wisdom and your friendship. And I do hope you enjoy this Congress. Thank you very much.